So welcome everyone to our wellness webinar. This is a really great one today on a great topic that's pretty relevant right now, the topic of grief. So I am Kasianchuk. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist and the director of health coaching here at Genève. So Swapna, I'd love for you to give your background, introduce yourself to our
Sure.
audience,
Mhm.
and yeah, let us know who you are.
Oh, okay. So I'm Swapna Vaidya. I'm a psychiatrist. I currently work at Multicare Hospital, but I have had an extensive background in consult liaison psychiatry. What that means is that I have had a background in dealing with psychiatric issues of patients who are going through medical problems or are going through trauma. And I was in New York actually during the 9/11 time. And so I have personal experience working on the ground for disaster psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where my background is. And here I am today trying to sort of connect with all of you to share some of the experiences that helped us back then and to talk a little bit about grief.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And interesting too, because we do hear a lot about some comparisons from what we're experiencing now with the COVID-19 pandemic to 9/11. So your experience, your insight from that experience to now will be really great and during this this webinar. And you mentioned that topic of grief, and we've seen more there's some more publications on grief right now, and there's some, just this feeling that even when I'm talking with my clients through Genève of just there's something different, there's something in almost in the air, but individuals are trying to work through this. Could you give us a brief description of what is grief from
Sure.
your background, and what do you see, or how is it maybe playing out for people right now in this situation?
Yeah, thank you, Stacey, because this is really an important issue to discuss right now. And you nailed it. Like a lot of people are trying to draw comparisons between what happened in 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have a lot of friends back in New York who are psychiatrists, and they are also saying that this sense of loss, this sense of grief is even much more than what they experienced when 9/11 happened because of the fatalities, which have been just immense. So that being said, what is grief? Grief is a sense of loss. And that's actually the best way I can describe it. And, normally when we look at grief, we say, okay, this is connected to bereavement, that you lost somebody. But right now, what everyone is experiencing is a big sense of loss, missing the way life was, missing what was the normal, missing the fact that you could just pop up and go to a restaurant and have dinner. That's grief.
Mm-hmm.
So grief is a normal human response to any kind of loss. So now I'm going to get a little technical and I'll talk about the stages of grief and how it's pertaining to this pandemic, if I may.
Absolutely,
So,
please do.
yeah. So, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was the pioneer who did a lot of research on grief, and she talked about stages of grief. So the first stage is denial. And when we connect this to the pandemic right now, there are personal levels of grief, local levels, and then on a national level of denial. So on a personal level, I'm sure a lot of people heard this, oh, I'm never going to get this virus, or that I'm young, or this is not going to happen to me, or not to my family. So that's a personal level. On a local level, the denial is that, oh, well, we're not going to follow social distancing. That doesn't really apply to me. And then on a national level, we've seen various forms of denial as to how we first denied it, and then we accepted it, and now we know what it is. Then we look at anger. So the next stage is anger. Now, once we deny it and we know, okay, this is really happening, then we get mad. We're really angry. And how do we express our anger? Towards the people who we are living with. And that is why I'm really concerned a little bit about on the other side is the rise of domestic violence and anger towards children. So this is a huge, important issue, how we need to deviate from anger and go towards acceptance. And the other issue of anger is social media. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the rantings and the ravings, and you're right and I'm wrong. So this is a way people are trying to clutch on to any sense of control. Then the third stage is bargaining. Then we're trying to bargain with each other. We're saying, okay, maybe if I do social distancing for a week, or maybe if I just stop it, perhaps I won't go to this place or that place, and then this will be done. or I can see XYZ friends because guess what? I've been seeing them, so they will not be infected. So this is bargaining. And then sadness. Finally, we are sad, we are demoralized, we are depressed, and then acceptance. Then we say, and that is the stage we have to arrive at. But you know what? Everybody takes time to arrive at that stage. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that it's okay. These are the feelings you're feeling, but the ultimate stage that you want to come to is acceptance. There is that serenity prayer. We can't change things. Some things we got to accept, and this is one of those hard life lessons. So this is what I would suggest in terms of grief, as well as how it's pertaining personally and locally with us.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there, Swapna. Several things come to mind. The first one that I had, you mentioned these layers, the personal layer, the local layer, the national layer. We might even, I don't know if we can add a global layer onto
Of
that.
course. Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, do those layers, does that add more grief, or does that make it heavier for the individual knowing that it's not just in their personal bubble, there's layers upon that? Do you see that effect with people?
Yeah, it actually can be dual, in a way, how human beings are, we're a social race. So when we know that we are not alone in this, then knowing that it's a global pandemic somehow helps. But then on the other hand, it can become a very worrisome thing. So this is how we have to set our acceptance and set what we can do and how we can control things that are in our control. So for instance, ruminating about it and worrying about it to a certain extent is just going to be destructive. But understanding that we are not in this together, we are not in this alone, and there is all this rush of vaccines being studied and antibodies being studied and all that gives us hope. So I would tend to go on the side of hope to say that we are all in this together, and hence we are all connected on a personal level, local level, national level, and then as you explained, Stacey, it's even the whole world pandemic.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point of finding ways to shift the thought process, to shift from maybe a more pessimistic thought to a more optimistic thought, to be supportive of what we're going through. Another question that I thought of too, you talked about this process being normal. So is it the is it normal to go through these stages in order, or do people tend to go to one stage, skip, come back? Is there what do you usually see, or what is considered normal, if
You
there is a
actually,
normal?
no, I know, but you said such a good point. Yes, there are no ways that one person reacts to a situation. It's not such a sort of like a single mold will fit everybody. So there are some people who would probably go towards acceptance, maybe because they've been traumatized before. A lot of the folks that I've seen, the psychiatrists or my friends or colleagues that I've talked to in New York have said that they reached the stage of acceptance pretty quickly because they had
Okay.
gone through it before. So they had already experienced it before, and when they knew that what happened then they couldn't control, what's happening now is not something they can control. But on the other hand, perhaps people who have never experienced this in lifetime, like the young kids, teenagers, maybe the millennials, they have never seen this, and this might be a very, very difficult time. And that's why I talked about the local level. I talked about the denial, where a lot of young people were saying, oh, this can't affect me. But we're now seeing a huge demographic of young people with no pre-existing health issues also getting sick by this virus. So that's something that the mind frame had to shift, to understand that this is actually happening to everybody. Maybe our older and our elderly population are more susceptible, and they may have a very devastating course of the illness, but that doesn't spare even the younger or the middle-aged folks that we have. And hence I think that it depends on where you're at the stage. If you've been if you've had experience before, if you've had some amount of training in trauma or acceptance or understanding, that can actually help how you can switch. So something to say.
Yeah, a silver lining, I guess, to have gone through something similar to this, that perhaps you're more resiliency or experienced is built. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And actually, I was going to talk about resilience. I came across a very good article about resilience. And, I was reading about Sheryl Sandberg and her option B.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's going to come up with much more material about it. But there was some things which really stuck with me from that article. She talks about resilience, but she talks about three P's, the three P's, the letter P, that are bad for you. So may I?
Oh, yeah,
So number
absolutely.
one, so she says number one is personalizing it. Number
Okay.
two, saying this is a permanent thing, and number three, saying it's pervasive, meaning it's affecting everything that I do. So
Mm,
these three P's are destructive. So how would you personalize this? You personalize this by saying, hey, you know what? I did something wrong. Oh, I got this virus and I gave it to my mom, or I gave it to my, things are not in your control.
mm-hmm.
So self-compassion is something you should practice. You shouldn't blame yourself. Second thing is permanence. The thing that, oh, this is uncertain. I'm never going to go back to normal. This is forever. But we know things are not forever. We know this too shall end. And the third and the last important thing that she talked about was pervasiveness. It doesn't mean that every aspect of our life is affected.
Mm-hmm.
We still have some silver linings, as you said. You have time to call your friends,
Yeah.
your childhood friends. I mean, I hadn't connected with them for God knows 25 years. And now we have like this WhatsApp group,
Mm-hmm.
and people are sharing things. And it's really nice to listen to, your childhood friends and what they are going through and how connected the world has become.
Mm-hmm.
Or, so we cannot say that everything about this is horrific and horrible. Try to find some silver lining, whatever that may be.
Yeah, oh, I like that. I'd not been familiar with those three Ps, but I think that gives, to add another one, gives perspective on just how where you're and allows that reflection, that mindfulness to piece to reflect on how am I internalizing this and what am I doing with the information and how can I change the story a little bit or reframe to be able to support myself.
Right. I think reframing that aspect you talked about, cognition,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. I just got
That's it.
like, called off because I was on my phone. So
That's
someone was
okay.
trying to call me. Another thing, I'm still on call in the hospital. So I'm sorry if there are like, such,
No problem. Thank you for doing
yeah,
for being on the front lines right now.
the exactly. And I really thank my doctors and my healthcare workers. And that's such an important thing
Hmm.
to, sort of like connect with right now. This is where I say that when you talk about how can you help in this pandemic, right? People feel helpless, but there is a way. You can work as a community. You
Hmm.
can work in your home. You can take care of your elders, your children. And at the same time, you can actually try to do something good for the community, such as healthcare workers, our essential workers who are going and putting their lives at stake. You
Hmm.
know, like some doctors are getting meals for the patients, for their staff, for their nurses, for their healthcare workers, and that way some doctors are actually cleaning the rooms in the ICU so that the cleaning lady doesn't have to go in. I mean, I thought
Yeah.
that was tremendous. I mean, been reading about these things on
Hmm.
Facebook, and I think that's such a humanity is
Hmm.
in its best way. So resilience doesn't really mean that you have to reject your unpleasant emotions. You
Hmm.
absolutely accept them. You accept them, you feel them, you go through them, but you don't let them control you.
Uh,
That's the key. And
yeah.
that's the hard part,
Yeah.
you know?
I think I like that you made that distinction of being able to experience your feelings, but also not letting them then sweep you away. I've been talking a lot with clients about giving permission, having them give themselves permission to most of it's around more on self-care, giving permission to take a nap if you're feeling tired, giving permission
Um,
to maybe take a little bit more time for yourself. So whether it's a little separating,
mm-hmm,
finding space in your house
mm-hmm,
where you can have some time alone,
mm-hmm.
and being okay with taking that time. It can be a hard thing
Oh, yeah.
to feel emotions, to give permission. Do you have recommendations for people on how to best feel emotions if that's not something they're comfortable with?
You know, exactly. And again, everybody's going to be different, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's emotions and reactions are going to be different. But what I would recommend, I like what you said about how do you give yourself permission. So I'll give you my example. I have a 5-year-old. right? And
Hmm.
I want to kind of sometimes get away.
Yeah.
And I tell my husband, like, listen, I'm going to be in the terrace or something, just don't, I need 20 minutes. I just need some time to focus on myself because there is so much going on work wise, so much going on community wise, um, and then with his needs, I want
Hmm.
to be the best version of myself, the best way I can. But you know what? There are times that I am accepting that my emotions are somewhat on the short, like being very short tempered sometimes, and I have to collect that and I have to accept and own it.
Hmm.
But I don't need to be pervasive and permanent about it. I don't need to think that this is the way I am always going to be. So what if I faltered? I have another chance, and my boy is going to grow with me and he's growing up also understanding this. He himself is adapting. So we have to kind of carve out a new normal. I think the best advice I can give you or give anybody is to not, be kind to yourself.
Hmm. Yeah.
Self criticism, I mean, to a certain extent is good, but try to forgive yourself. Forgiveness is the key. Whether you're forgiving your spouse or your, friends or, your son, that sensitivity factor has become such a huge issue.
Hmm.
And I feel like, especially now, since we're all confined and we're becoming, kind of like, what is this? When can we get out? And that's the time to recognize, let's try to be compassionate and kind first.
Hmm. Yeah, that and that comes with perhaps trying to uh, when we have those feelings of anger or frustration, you have to turn those down a little bit and try to make that kindness and compassion forefront, which can isn't always instinctual when we're in these situations dealing with grief.
I mean, when I was sort of like preparing for this talk, I think a lot of the things that I read resonated with me. So it's just important to realize that even though maybe I'm a psychiatrist and I've studied this, but to adapt to this as a person, as a human who's going through this, it's equally hard. So
Hmm.
this I think I would tell everybody, that once you get this knowledge or you read about it, it's okay to go back and then sort of ruminate and say, oh, maybe this didn't work for me. Maybe I'll try something different. For instance, when I say to people meditation, they're like, oh, come on, I'm so anxious, I'm not going to meditate. But even anxiety can be meditation. Why?
Hmm.
Because you're actually feeling that anxiety, processing it, and
Hmm.
understanding it. One good thing about that would be to maintain a journal. Write down. Write down those anxious thoughts. Why are they coming? Are they rational, you feel? Are they irrational? Can you
Hmm.
do something about it? And even then, let's say you acted in a certain way, you're not proud of yourself. Then write down about that and say, okay, what could I have done different? If I have another opportunity, can I do something different? Apologize. Forgiveness, as I said, is, I think it's going to be a much needed gift that we all can give each other, because we all have to say, I'm sorry, I may have acted out of anger. And you will
Hmm.
see the other person absolutely identifies and says, you know what, even me, I'm also going through this. And then you
Yeah.
move on. And that's the best, sort of like advice that I can think of for
Hmm.
people.
Yeah, taking that step and having the courage to call those feelings out, I think is so important. Um, can be hard, but like you said, oftentimes when you are saying, you realize that the other person's also feeling the same. So
Yes.
then there's a moment of bonding in that over anger.
That's the thing, when you resonate and when you say we are in this together, this is affecting me in XYZ way, this is affecting you in
Hmm.
another way. But guess what? It's affecting all of us.
Hmm.
Not a single person that we can talk to today would say, oh, this is all great and I have found my way out of it. Not a single person.
Right.
And so then knowing that gives you hope,
Yeah.
because you know that you're not the only one struggling. Yes, you are struggling, but there are others, many more. And then it gives you that appreciation of what can I do to be productive and help them.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the doing things. A lot of times when we feel this place of grief or helplessness, doing something can help maybe move us through the stages.
Yeah,
You recommended helping healthcare workers or contributing to your community in certain ways. Anything else that you could think of? Even what about for the individual themselves? What can they do
absolutely.
themselves?
Simple things, try to sort of find out a recipe that, let's say you miss going to the restaurants, right? So try to Google a recipe that you actually miss and see if you can
Hmm.
make it. It may not turn out great, but at least you tried. That would be one
Hmm.
thing. Find out what your interests are. Like, do you like to garden, or do you like to paint maybe, or play games maybe? Like, you could have people are doing Facebook games, sort of
Uh-huh.
like FaceTime, or having interactive games with each other. What can you do? You can have a virtual happy hour with somebody. Just be
Hmm.
careful with how much you're drinking, because that's another slippery slope. So things such as that. And
Hmm.
you will find that you have developed these hobbies, or that you had neglected these hobbies
Hmm.
because you didn't have time.
Hmm.
Reach out to that old friend of yours that you always meant to call but never had the time.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, I mean, try to kind of be at their level and try to learn at their level and help them out. And you know sort of try to see yourself in a different light than just that you're in this pandemic. But there are many ways to self-soothe, heal oneself. Like, give yourself a mini spa at home.
Hmm.
Put a face mask on, watch your favorite movie. Right? I mean, there are many perks of working from home also, in that sense,
Hmm.
because you don't have to travel. So you at least have that time that you can save yourself and say, okay, let me do something to make my spirit lift up, whether it's for 20 minutes or something. Go for a stroll. The weather's getting better. Go for a walk, maintain social distancing, and soak in the sun. And then always have this attitude that this too shall pass. There
Hmm.
will be some time. There is going to be time. This is not an easy fix. I think you mentioned it once, right? It's like running a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
So you did, right? So
I think
I
so
would,
at our first
yeah,
webinar.
the first webinar you did. So I'm using that exactly what you said. And I would say that that's what you can do, one step at a time,
Hmm.
one moment at a time, one breath at a time, and knowing that this too shall pass, and we are going to appreciate how we are spending our present, because
Yeah.
our present is important. We don't have to wait in the past, and we don't have to project the future. We
Hmm.
can still enjoy things right now, maybe in a limited way, but there are ways to appreciate what's right and good for us. I was reading about this, and I found out, like, in London, some people are actually having um, parties on their driveways, dance parties. So they're maintaining social distancing, they're blaring music, and they're all dancing. And then in New York, my friend, when I had connected with her, said she was having these healthcare workers were, walking, and there were applauds from
Wow.
people. So, I was on the phone with her, and she actually
Uh,
made me hear it, and it was amazing. So some of those things.
yeah. That gives me chills just thinking about that. And I've seen in some other countries too, where at certain times of day, everyone comes out and applauds or plays music for their healthcare workers. And it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, that type of unification is something we wouldn't experience otherwise. So
Yeah.
there's definitely power in that.
Oh yeah, I heard it. I mean, even though, like, she had the phone close to a window,
Yeah.
and it was just amazing. Even though I wasn't there, I felt like, wow, this is such a great appreciation, and the whole world, the city is coming together.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, that unification piece.
Yeah.
Well, we have a question that came in from one of our viewers, and it says,
Okay.
what if you need to be the cheerleader or positive force for others? Can you be honest about how worried or down you feel? This person feels fear of pulling them down when I feel fear pulling them down when they're leaning on me for leadership or security. So how do people balance that?
That's such a great question. How do you balance when you are supposedly this leader? But even leaders can experience insecurity and fear. What's worked for me? Transparency. Always be transparent about your emotions. Say that, I'm having a hard time right now. What can I do? You know, like, lean on others. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's okay to lean on others, even for a leader, or even for this most optimistic person, because you want to do that.
Hmm.
That makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think again, it comes back to we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to support each other. So and that give and take where we all may be going through these ebbs and flows or flowing through the stages of grief. When I am feeling like I need support, I need to be able to lean on someone to say, I need support right now. And then when you need support, come to me.
Absolutely.
There's
It's
strength
going
in
to be
that.
it's going to be reciprocal. So leadership can be at local level, family level,
Hmm.
community level, again, national level. And I go back to these levels because it's important, to know that none of us are going to find the right answers.
Yep.
There will be times we falter, we stumble, we are doing our best. recognizing that and having self-compassion. Often cheerleaders, they kind of have this whole burden on their shoulders, thinking that this is really my thing and I have to own it. No, this is a collective thing. Let's all
Right.
own it together.
Yeah. And then here's another question that's something else that I see is, and I've actually been reading about, and I'd love to get your take, is this comparative grief, where people might say, they feel guilty complaining about their situation when others have it so much worse. What are your thoughts on that when we say, well, you have a family member in the hospital, I shouldn't feel bad for not being able to leave my house. What are your thoughts on that?
So remember when I went back to resilience and I talked about those three bad P's? The first
Mm-hmm.
P was personalization.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is falling exactly there,
Yeah,
because
good
you are
point.
not allowed to, feel guilty. Everybody's circumstances are different.
Mm-hmm.
Granted that, on a level, you might see that this is much more catastrophic than what you're going through,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't diminish your grief. That doesn't diminish your feelings of loss in any which way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to own that, to say that you can't feel guilty about the way you're feeling, because then you will not practice
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion. And you don't practice self-compassion, you're not going to be helpful to others. Because again, I think I have mentioned it before, but it's like going in that aircraft and you don't put that oxygen mask on yourself. You're
Yeah.
not going to be good to anybody. So
Yeah.
please, I think there is a fine line, I think, between being selfish. It's not being selfish,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually being compassionate towards yourself,
Yeah. I
and
like that.
that's okay, right? So
Yep.
when people compare and say, hey, you got it better than me, or I got it, see, this happens everywhere, but that doesn't mean you need to personalize it and express it as like, this is my problem or this is my guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So that be personalized, let's take that away.
That's such a good point. And you're right that it gets in the way of that compassion and even the feeling of guilt. Working with clients even before this, guilt oftentimes it would come up, especially with working moms, balancing
Right,
work and family,
right,
and guilt would sometimes come up, and it can be a feeling that weighs people down, and it
of
can
course.
and it's almost like it, it creates a knot, or it creates this rock in people. So having them really turn that guilt into compassion, or eliminating the guilt and transitioning more to that compassion, can open up possibilities.
Oh, absolutely. Because, the more you're self destructive and thinking you have done so many wrongs in your life, you're not going to be able to come up to a level that you can be useful, let alone to yourself, to others.
Hmm.
So that's a very important thing to talk about.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that insight. We have another question here that said, I have started to enjoy the slowness of sheltering in place. In some ways, we're developing good and new habits. I worry about losing things when things do get back to normal. How do we hang on to the good changes that are happening right now?
Such a good point, because I myself am experiencing that. And
Hmm.
I feel like, what do I do now that I recognize that slowing down a bit was so good for me? So I think that registering that and making sure that once we step back to this new other normal that we may have to continue to understand what helped us and to nurture
Mm,
our soul with all the positive habits that we have gained from this particular pause that life has given us. So
yeah.
it's so important that this, in a way, to look at it as a learning lesson.
Hmm.
We kind of learned a lot about ourselves, about our friends, about our family, about
Hmm.
what we could do, which could enhance our lives even after we are able to step out.
Yeah.
So it's a very important and an excellent question.
And I think that's where maybe some of the journaling could come in. We should be
Yes.
writing down right now all the joyful things, all the things we like about sheltering in place. Um, I could say I've had clients that have been wanting to do more meal planning, and now the situations you have to meal plan because you can only
Yeah.
go to the grocery store so
Yeah.
often. um,
That's
so
a good one.
things
Yeah.
like that where they're learning those habits. Other clients that have had really long commutes, so maybe 3 or 4 hours a day they're spending in the car, now they can do an exercise class at home and they can sleep in without setting an alarm. And so other things that they're noticing, oh, there is a trade-off here that, you know, you don't have to, maybe your getting dressed routine is a little bit less if you don't have
Yep.
to be on camera, you don't have to attend
Yeah.
meetings. You can save time there, and the gift of time is really, really something we have right now.
And I think, yes, exactly. So for the commute part, you know, I used to go through 3, 4 hospitals at a time. So yeah, I recognize this is great to do Zoom meetings. And then, you know, the other thing is the wardrobe. You can always have pajamas and then you can dress up from the, you know, so yeah,
Mhm.
there are ways to kind of like recognize the freedom that this gives
Mhm.
you and the novel ways that you can still continue to work, you know, even in our healthcare industry where we are having
Yeah.
tele-psych, tele-apps, everything has gone on tele and remote. And you know what we're finding? Guess what we're finding? The no-show rate is 0 because you're
Oh, wow.
fine. Think
There
about
we
that.
go. It took a pandemic to figure
It
that
took a
out.
pandemic to figure that out, that there is no-show rate. And the reason for that is that we actually have patients, you know, there and you are here. And at the same time, what I'm seeing from my psychiatry colleagues is that a lot of patients who haven't opened up to them in the past are able to open up to them in the confines of their home. Isn't
Oh,
that
wow.
something? Because they feel comfortable in their homes. A lot of the adolescent patients are showing their child psychiatrist their rooms, their favorite things. And this is such a great way to connect and develop therapeutic plans for the patient. So
Wow.
good side of that, tele apps and all came up also. So we're
Yeah.
discovering. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point too, of we don't know what we don't know. And that unknown can be scary. And our instinct is to think of the unknown as scary and bad and negative, when reframing again can help to say, what about, because it's unknown, we can also paint a landscape of opportunity. You know, there could
right.
be, you know, the idea of going to telehealth, there was concerns about, are you going to be able to have that same connection with people? And you're talking about maybe advancing therapeutic practices down the line based on what we learned from this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's such great insight. Well, with going back to the stages of change, you
Mm-hmm.
know, we talked about that at the begin, or stages of grief. Sorry,
No, that's okay.
uh,
Yeah. It's
stages.
change also, stages of change also,
Yes.
actually. Yeah.
With the stages of grief, what would you say? Why is it important for people to understand those, or to at least know that those stages? Why is that important for people to know right now?
You know, because knowledge is important.
Hmm.
When you know what you're feeling and when you know that there is something that actually has, someone has done research on those feelings, you know that this is not abnormal, this is not something out of the way, and this is something that you can then resonate and understand. Once you
Hmm.
understand your feelings, that then it's easier to try to kind of like, you know, work through them. If
Yeah.
you don't know what you're feeling, then you feel like, what is this I'm feeling? Am I the only one? You know, why am
Hmm.
I feeling like this? So things such as that.
Excellent. Yeah, having that understanding, and the framework to work through that.
Framework. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be helpful for people to
Mm-hmm.
know. Okay, I'm feeling this. I'm noticing habits of denial. All right, I can expect the next anger. That was next.
The
Uh,
next was anger. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. First is denial, anger.
and
Then you're,
then.
you know, bargaining. Then
Hmm.
you are feeling sad. And then finally you accept it. So it takes a while.
Yeah, and that's a good, to be aware. Okay, anger might be coming next. Sadness might be
Mm-hmm.
coming next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That can give you a little bit of a, you know, versus that anticipation of the unknown. Like this could be coming,
Yeah.
as a way
Mm-hmm.
to cope and to handle that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, what about looking at, you also mentioned that this could be different for different people. So if some people are going through this, and especially if they've had experience, they've had other, times that they've had to practice this
Yeah.
grief, they might go through it faster. How do you recommend people acknowledging their own process? They're giving themselves the time to not, you know, be looking at their watch like, I should be feeling angry now. How,
So
when am I going to
that's the
get through
thing.
this?
You know, I think I'm going to say like what Dr. Fauci said, only like he said, only the virus decides it. So in this case, it's only your feelings that will decide it. And
Hmm.
your feelings are the only feelings that are important.
Yeah.
How you feel. Doesn't mean if XYZ is feeling it in a different way and they've reached the stage of acceptance and such, you don't know about their journey. You don't know about their internal struggles. You only know about your own internal struggles. And the other thing is that stress is paramount. It is going to happen. There is going to be a significant amount of PTSD from this, a significant amount of anxiety from this. So it depends. If you have experienced it before, you might have had some tools, you might have worked with somebody and you know, or maybe that's how you arrive at the acceptance stage faster. But, you know, if you've not, that's okay. Now you know that this is what people go through in a way when we describe grief or stress. And there are coping mechanisms. So there are so many different things that are there. And what one tool doesn't, you know, fit everybody. Some people would like something like more about CBT, behavior therapies. Some people say mindfulness helps them more. So whichever modality or a combination of it might help you. You know, and in some cases, it might be so severe, might need medications. And at that point in time, you should consult your psychiatrist.
Excellent. Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point to also recognize that it's because it is personal. What works for one person might not work for the other. So being
Yep.
open to finding the strategy that works best for you.
Absolutely.
One other question we had here is how much emotion, like grief and fear, is it okay to show in front of children, your own children?
Yeah, that's interesting, you know. So I think we do the best, but at the same time, there might be things that, you know, you hear about and you are emotional about, and your child picks on it. So the way, and I consulted my friend, she's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and she's like, talk to them in a language that they know or they understand. Okay, because your child knows something is going on. Meet them at the level they are. So for my 5-year-old, for instance, they know that this is a virus. They've been taught in school. They have an online class also, so they know about that. And, you know, he watched the storyboard. There was like the storyboard who talked about virology, the T cells, the helper cells, the killer cells. And I'm like, oh my God, this is too much. And he's like, oh my God, mom, I mean, I get a killer cells and I can kill the virus. And I said, okay. But it became a sort of an educational moment and also something that we connected on, although it was funny. And, you know, so he knows that this is new normal. He knows mommy makes me wash my hands gazillion times. He gets mad, but he understands. And, you know, so those are the kind of things you can involve. I think you have to be transparent to them to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I like talking to bring it to meet them where they are.
Right.
And so that it's in their terms that they
Yes,
can
it's in their
understand those
terms
things.
that they
Yeah.
exactly. And then, you know, so this way they don't feel like, oh, mom and dad are having some secrets from us, or that, you know, that makes them even more nervous. Knowing that, you know, mom, dad are experiencing it with us, some like that's okay. So it's just something. Sorry, I was on call again. I'm
That's
gonna try
okay.
to actually log on to my computer so that this way I can, you know, I just I didn't realize I was on call today. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Um, well, with, you know, having that transparency, I think with everyone, like you talked about,
Yeah.
we want to know, and that that makes sense for kids. They're
Mm-hmm.
curious, they're
Yeah.
humans, and
Mm-hmm.
they want to know as well. And so being able to be as transparent as possible is a good
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
point. Another question here is, when do I know my emotional state is bad enough that I should seek professional help?
So, you know, I would say that couple things. When you feel that the stress is so much that you cannot stop talking about, I mean, ruminating about it to the point that it interferes with your sleep, your appetite, and you start getting some very dark thoughts wherein you're kind of thinking it's not worth going on. I want to kind of end this. Those are the times to really seek professional help ASAP. Or then to say if you're not sleeping well or to having some consistent symptoms that you feel you need some guidance to how to kind of like get yourself back on a, you know, somewhat even keel, then to talk to somebody about it. So the professional help can differ to different people. Some people it might mean just talk therapy. Some people it might mean medication. Some people it might mean, you know, being admitted, depending on the level that they are at.
Okay, that's
But it's
excellent.
important to, I think that's a great question, and it's very, very important to kind of like be connected with your feelings like this and
Okay.
to talk to people. Yeah.
And would you say in general, if you're feeling that you need just additional support, that it can't hurt to reach out for that help?
Yes, I would say that if you're needing additional support, doesn't help. It doesn't absolutely doesn't hurt. You know, there are many programs right now. There are a lot of like people doing some online outreaches also. I think in Washington State there are programs, And you can certainly, kind of like connect or call, if really things are dire, call 911. I
Okay.
know people don't want to go to the hospitals as such, but maybe they can promote and, kind of give an idea as to where they can be seen or they can get some help.
Excellent.
So yeah, things such as that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Another question came from this person mentioned they feel like they've gone through the stages of grief, gotten to acceptance, but then the longer it goes on, they get anxious again. Am I still in the stages of grief, or am I going backwards? So the question that we had was, this person feels like they've moved through the stages of grief, gotten to acceptance, but then as things go on, they feel more anxious again. Are they still in the stages of grief, or or is it possible to go backwards in the stages?
So it is possible to go backwards. I mean, you could probably think, okay, you're doing well and you're feeling that this is working and that you finally got a grip on it. But there might be something that happens. There might
Mm-hmm.
be a memory that triggers it. There might be an incident that kind of like makes you feel, okay, um, I'm not feeling that great. I'm not feeling, as if I am gone to that stage of acceptance. I'm kind of coming back to anger. I'm coming back to bargaining.
Mm-hmm.
This is very common in grief, and this happens for a while until you reach the stage where you understand that, you know what, you struggled, you bargained, you cried, you were sad, you denied, and now the only emotion and the only thing that's really left is acceptance. And we all go through it in different ways, and we can, kind of jump from one to the other. That's very normal.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you explained that it's not linear. It's not completely linear.
No,
So.
it's not. It's absolutely not linear because, the thing is that each day comes with different emotions and different informations. And we've seen that, we've seen that how it's being fed in the media, how we are being sort of like, we hear about loved ones, we hear about struggles going through, we, kind of like jump back from one to the other. Uh, a lot of people are saying, okay, it's only going to be until April end. Then we hear, no, we're going to be socially isolating more. So each day, the information comes at us in different ways and from different angles. So then, it definitely becomes difficult
Okay.
to stick to one stage.
Yes. And I don't know if you could see the chats, but Jill, our CEO, did chime in. She said it's real life. And so thank you so much for bringing your expertise while being on the call. So no worries about managing all the different screens that we had. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jill. So sorry about that. I just had not realized I was on call.
No problem.
Happens.
Well, a couple other questions here. One is, when people are sharing their stress or their worries, how should I respond? I tend to be the silver lining person, but I don't want to dismiss what they're experiencing. So how do we honor what they're feeling while also maybe not getting into that if it is more down and negative?
Excellent question. And, I think that the best advice or the answer I can give you is to be very authentic about how you're feeling while you're trying to help the person.
Mm-hmm.
So acknowledging what you're feeling and understanding that there might be some things that may not be the right thing to say to the person,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. Sometimes people are just talking to us for looking for validation. All we really want to do is to validate each other's feelings and to recognize that everybody is going through this differently. So I think one of you mentioned about being the cheerleader, and that's fine. But if you feel that this person is not ready to accept that, silver lining or the cheerleading advice, then meet them where they are at.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, as I said, like just listening, empathic listening helps tremendously. But you have to protect your own feelings, because if you try to get mired in somebody else's experiences, then you distance yourself from your own feelings. So
Mm.
it's a very fine line to balance, but understand that how you feel, how you're dealing with this virus, that is the best thing and the only thing you can really do while helping others.
Excellent. Yeah, remembering to, again, it's putting that oxygen mask
Mask.
on.
Keep saying that, oxygen mask.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I mean, if you think about it, if you cannot help yourself, I mean, how good are you to help anybody else?
Yeah.
So, and there are times that we can even, we talk to each other, our friends, our psychiatrist friends, we have a group, we talk to each other for our own, de-stressing and debriefing. And we hear sometimes heated arguments and comments, and then we say to each other, time out, I think it's
Yeah.
best now, let's just go watch a movie individually and then come back and kind of argue that point out. But that's important to understand that
Hmm.
it might not be something that there might be a solution to every question.
Yeah, no, I like that, where there really is, again, coming back to that balance, and we all have to take care of ourselves in this. Or, like you said, I mean, what if we can't take care of ourselves, that it's just going to be half-hearted efforts to take care of everyone else.
And that's exactly, I feel like that is the most important thing you can do. And while you take care of yourself, you understand your limitations.
Hmm.
So for instance, if you ask somebody that is not able to be there 100% for whatever reason, that's okay too. If you're feeling that you're getting too stressed hearing to your friend talk about catastrophic events, it's okay to say that I need a moment,
Hmm.
that I'm not feeling that I can be helpful because I'm feeling overwhelmed by whatever you're saying to me.
Yeah.
So, and then come back to it when you feel ready and say, hey, you know what? I feel like now I could probably help you out if you still want my help.
Hmm.
So just because you don't have to step up, there is no such hard and fast rule that you have to step up, that you have to, should and must, these kind of adjectives you should take away from your life.
Yeah.
You really just try your best. That's all you can do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way. And right now we have an opportunity that the best because we don't know what the best is, what like the ideal is. So if everyone's doing the best they can, then that's all we can ask.
Agreed. And I
Yeah.
think that, as I said, the collective sense of knowing that we're all in this together, that is the one thing that will get all of us through this.
Yeah.
Because, I think it's important to realize that this has happened before.
Hmm.
Remember, the Spanish flu happened in 1918.
Hmm.
And yes, it came in waves and it took about 1920 for it to completely disappear. And I know
Hmm.
when I say it, it sounds like, oh my God, 2 years, what is she saying? What I'm trying to say is that things, after all, crises will end. Things
Hmm.
will stop. There might be a new normal, but there will be a new normal.
Yeah.
So we'll all go through this. We are all going to go through this collectively as a world together. And then everyone will have to figure out how we fit back into the world, how we start our world back together. But we've gone through tragedies and we know that this too shall pass.
Hmm.
It has to pass. When it'll pass, well, that only time will tell.
Exactly, exactly. Well, one more question here. And actually, we do have about 10 more minutes, so anybody else that has questions, feel free to post them away. But this one says, we are all in such confined spaces these days with different stages of grief. I'm finding in my family that someone may be in acceptance, another's in anger, another's in denial, all within 1 hour. How does one navigate that as the head of a household when you're managing different people in different stages?
Well, you know, all I can say from my experience is just give time out to everybody at some point in your life because it helps. You just take distance. And I can say that, when I find myself going towards the stage of anger or
Hmm.
lashing out, I have to take time out and I have to say that. And it took some time to understand what and where I was being impulsive.
Hmm.
And the same goes with, other people in my household, my husband, my child. And we recognize that we really need to be open about our feelings. So
Hmm.
when you're open and you call out those feelings, that's when you ask for help. But when
Okay.
you lash out depending on those feelings, then you hurt. So when you say, hey, look, I'm really feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, I don't know why, I don't know what's going on, I really need some time out. And then you
Yeah.
do that, you come back refreshed. Or then,
Yeah.
me and my husband, we have what is called as like text fights.
Yeah.
Don't lash out, just text to each other. Text what you want to text, and
There
then
you go.
fine, text emojis.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, that's a good way to.
so, and then come back and say, hey, you know, yeah, we are humans, we falter, and do the best that you can do. Don't blame
Mhm.
yourself. That's my advice.
Excellent. Yeah, and that comes back to giving permission,
Mhm.
giving yourself permission to feel that anger, but also give the space to do it, and give yourself credit for not wanting to hurt other people with the anger. That's not the intention of the anger.
And say you did, then go back and apologize. Because
Yes.
like I said, forgiveness is a big thing.
Yeah.
When you apologize, the other person feels validated. So
Hmm.
validation of the feelings, that's important. Validate and say, I know you're feeling this way. Because guess what? Yesterday I was feeling this.
Hmm.
Sharing that same similar feeling gives you an ability to connect and empathize.
One other question here is, can we prepare for grief? Is there any preparation? Is there ways to do that besides experiencing it previously?
That's a very good point. I mean, grief comes in so many different forms and so many different modalities that it's so hard to prepare for something which we really don't know is in the future, and in how and what ways it's going to affect us. Now we've been primed a bit because of the nature of this pandemic to recognize that we are also vulnerable, that
Hmm.
given that this virus is pretty virulent, and again, not just because of the physical travesties, it's because of the emotional travesties, having to isolate, having to be confined. I think that the way that I would look at it is your past experiences will prepare you for grief.
Okay.
How you've been through before, dealing with these traumatic events in your life will prepare you for grief. And this is where resilience comes in point, because resilience is what actually helps build the core. I mean, resilience builds the sort of the core of your mental stability or structure, to know that you kind of use some constructive mechanisms, constructive ways, constructive thought processes to deal with what's actually happening in terms of the grief.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, it's interesting that part of the grief is the fact that it is unknown, right? Yeah, there's a connection there.
And yet, you know what, we all as a collective human experience go through grief, because we've all sort of like, not going very philosophical or spiritual, but when we know we are born, right, we always go through stages, and we know that there is going to be at some point an end
Hmm.
to our life existence, and this is something, it's universal. And
Hmm.
so grief has been there, it's been present since decades and decades and decades, and what we need to understand is how we are going to step up and look at it, and undergo it and experience its emotions. You have to experience it to be able to then take a distance from it and say, okay, now I can kind of like deal with what's going on in the way I will function back in my life. But that the emotions are so very important to experience.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good wrapping up of just, being willing to experience the emotions, and knowing that it's okay, it's normal, and it will happen. It will happen to all of us in some way, shape, or form during this time.
Yes, and again, my apologies for that technical errors, but
No problem.
there you go, not
Yeah.
gonna personalize it much more than that. But thank you,
Exactly.
and thank you, Stacey, for conducting this, and I thank the team of Genevieve and Jill for giving me the opportunity to participate today.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your work, that you're doing right now, and all the best to you, your family.
Thank you.
Um, and any resources or recommendations you have for the listeners?
There are a couple of recommendations and resources that I think I have sent to Shannon, that
Okay.
would be the best way that maybe we can distribute it to our listeners. There are some local resources, some national resources, some booklets, meditation, mindfulness apps, so many different ways. And hopefully Shannon can compile that, and then we can sort of send it over to our listeners so that they can see what is useful for them.
Excellent. No, that's great to have your credible resources. There's a lot of things out there right now, so we appreciate you providing those. We will send those to our listeners. And then just a reminder, if anybody is interested, we do have our Health Fix program. So that is working with a health coach, a registered dietitian, nutritionist. Can be a great way if you're looking to figure out, how do you establish that routine? How do you incorporate meditation or mindfulness? What does that look like in your day? How do you set those boundaries so you can have time for yourself, wanting to get a little bit more exercise, or meal planning tips? Those are all things that we can help you with. And then we do have our telemedicine providers as well. So right now, while obviously COVID-19 is a priority, we can't neglect our health in other areas. So especially women's health, we do have some states that are offering primary care services, and that's listed on our website. And then we do have our extensive OBGYN services for even more states. So take a look at that if you're interested. It's a great way to have telehealth provided without having to go to a doctor's office right now, and we're here for you for that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. It's been great talking with everyone. Thank you again, Swapna, for your time, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. Thanks again.
Okay. Oh, and just a reminder for everyone that our next webinar will be this same time next Thursday, and we're going to be talking about, it's going to be a combination of hydration, socialization, and then how does alcohol fit, and what to drink, what not to drink, and how to, as Swapna indicated, sometimes those Zoom happy hours when no one has to drive might get a little out of control. So we can we'll provide recommendations on how to keep that moderate and where alcohol fits from a hydration standpoint.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stacey, so much.
All right. Take care.
See you all the next time.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Bye-bye.